Hello and welcome to Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. My name is Ben and with me as always is...
Jim, the Jedi.
Ooh, huge call, considering there's like one in this movie.
Look, before we get into all that, let me get us started with a synopsis of this week's movie adventure, which is Return of the Jedi. All right, you
Hit me,
ready,
Jim.
Ben? All right. So, look, before I do the synopsis, I could have gone crazy with the synopsis, but the fact is, this is part 3 of a space opera, right? So I'm not going to explain things from parts 1 and 2 because that's not part of the brief. But at the same time, if you have no idea, this is part 3 of a space opera. And look, I'm not sure that this synopsis makes a whole lot of sense if you haven't watched part 1 and 2.
We, in our infinite wisdom as a podcast, decided to go with the third movie in the trilogy before the first two. So, whose fault is it really?
Yeah, look, okay, so yeah, that's a nice way of blaming me for this. But look, I'll just hit us, okay? So, Return of the Jedi. This is our synopsis. So Leia, disguised as a bounty hunter, presents a captured Chewbacca to Jabba the Hutt to negotiate the release of Han Solo, who is encased in carbonite from events from the end of the movie before. Now, while there, she attempts to free Han, but she is captured and enslaved. Luke soon arrives and demands that Jabba release his friends, leads to a skirmish with Jabba's minions and the demise of Jabba, who is strangled by Leia. The rebels escape from Jabba's sail barge as it explodes, and they head to rendezvous with the Rebel Alliance. Luke, however, returns to Dagobah to complete his Jedi training with Master Yoda. Yoda confirms that Darth Vader is Luke's father and reveals that there is another Skywalker before passing away, becoming one with the Force. Obi-Wan Kenobi's spirit appears at that point to confirm that to Luke that Leia is in fact his sister. Luke leaves Dagobah and returns to his friends to rendezvous with the rest of the Alliance fleet. The Rebel Alliance learns of the Empire's construction of a new Death Star, which is nearing completion and protected by a shield generator on the nearby forest moon of Endor. They plan a two-pronged attack. One team will deactivate the shield on Endor, allowing the main Starfleet to then destroy the Death Star. Luke, Han and Leia and Chewbacca, along with the droids C-3PO and R2-D2, lead the team bound for the forest moon of Endor to destroy the shield generator there, while Lando Calrissian leads the main fleet in space. While on the moon of Endor, the strike team encounters Imperial forces as well as a friendly local alien race called Ewoks, and they also engage in skirmishes with stormtroopers, AT-ST walkers, and speeder bikes. Luke decides to confront Vader and the Emperor alone, believing that he can turn Vader back to the light side of the Force. To accomplish this, he surrenders to Imperial troops on the forest moon and is subsequently taken by Darth Vader to the Death Star itself and brought before the Emperor. With the help of the Ewoks, the rebels capture the Imperial bunker on Endor and deactivate the shield generator, allowing the rebel fleet to approach the Death Star. In the Emperor's throne room, meanwhile, on the Death Star, the Emperor manipulates Luke's emotions and tries to turn him to the dark side, goading him into attacking Vader in anger. Luke and Vader engage in a lightsaber duel, during which Vader senses Luke's compassion for him as well as conflict within himself. The Emperor urges Luke to kill Vader and take his place at the Emperor's side, but Luke refuses, choosing instead to reject the dark side of the Force. Vader, conflicted by his love for his son, ultimately turns against the Emperor, sacrificing himself to save Luke. Vader is thus redeemed as Anakin Skywalker and dies in Luke's arms. With the shield down, the rebel fleet, led by Lando Calrissian and Wedge Antilles, launch a final assault on the Death Star. In a chaotic space battle, rebel starfighters navigate the Death Star's defenses and manage to destroy its reactor core, causing it to explode. The galaxy celebrates with the downfall of the Empire, with Ewoks and rebels rejoicing together on Endor. Luke, Leia, Han, and their friends mourn the loss of Vader and honor the sacrifices he made in the struggle for freedom, while the spirits of Anakin, Yoda, and Obi-Wan watch over them. The end.
Great synopsis, Jim. Let me hit you with the facts. All right. So, released in 1983, directed by Richard Manquand. How do we pronounce it?
I think it's just Marquand. That's how it's spelled,
Marquand.
you know. So.
Q's throw me, dude. Famous, really, for this movie. He directed a few TV stuff, a little bit of TV episodes, all that sort of jazz. He did direct a movie just before this called Eye of the Needle, which is what caught George Lucas's eye to actually get him in to direct this movie. Unfortunately, he did pass away in 1987 at the age of 49, which means he didn't actually get to probably live up to his potential as far as a director goes. Screenplay, George Lucas. Lawrence Kasdan. Story by George Lucas. Starring, all right, Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, Billy D. Williams, Anthony Daniels, David Prowse, Kenny Baker, Peter Mayhew, and Frank Oz. And who did they miss out?
Yeah, it's interesting because, James Earl Jones was not originally credited in any of the three Star Wars movies, as the iconic voice of Darth Vader. So it's kind of wild, that he's such a huge part of those movies and not credited, but he was then restored to the credits in one of the many changes that George Lucas has made to it in subsequent years. So you could sort of argue that is maybe the best change that George Lucas has made.
So many good changes, Jim. So many. Music by the second person I think about when I think about Star Wars, John Williams. A budget of between $32.5 million and $42.7 million. Domestic or total box office of $482 million at time of release. Just to explain the hype that this movie had coming and being released in 1983, I want to explain the opening weekends for all three Star Wars movies. So Star Wars New Hope, opening weekend of 1.5 million. For a movie that nobody saw coming, wasn't by anyone who was really famous, not bad. Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, 4.9 million. And lastly, this is a massive jump, Star Wars Return of the Jedi, $23 million opening weekend. The hype was real going to this movie. Like, people, it's hard to understand these days. Like, you book everything online now, and you pick your seat, and you pick your seat next to your friends, and at worst, you might have to go to the second session because the first one books out really fast. People camped out to watch these movies. They lined up weeks in advance to get tickets on unallocated seating to watch these movies, which is hard to comprehend these days. Like, people just we don't have to do that anymore. But we're both super familiar with this movie, so it might be a bit hard to decide where to start. I'm going to give it to you. Where would you like to start with Star Wars Return of the Jedi?
I guess, look, and I know you're probably still wondering why, Jim, did you decide to start the Star Wars journey with the third film of the original trilogy? And it's kind of, I just think it's a really fascinating point in time for the Star Wars franchise, so yes, there's story and there's characters and all of that sort of thing, but it's interesting because this was quite clearly designed to be the end of the trilogy and the franchise. Now, you can read numerous reviews with George Lucas where he says that wasn't the case and he always had plans for more. You can read other interviews, though, from George Lucas where he says, no, this was definitely going to be the end. It seems to depend what mood you catch him in and what year the interview is given in as to what he actually says regarding the end of the Star Wars franchise,
Well, directly after this film, he'd kind of had enough.
Yeah.
Like, he was burnt out by fights with the Directors Guild of America, with just making these movies, with Hollywood system in general. Like, the dude liked stories. He didn't necessarily like making these movies anymore.
He was also going through a divorce during the production of Return of the Jedi. And, the divorce was with, Marcia Lucas, who was also the editor of the Star Wars films. So, he had a lot on his plate, I think is pretty, and pretty clear that he was kind of, ready to move on to other things. So look, if you look at this film as a story and you look at it as the culmination of a trilogy, it really does, for all intents and purposes, feel like it was designed and constructed to be the end. Everything about this movie is designed to conclude and to sort of finish up. And I think it does that really, really well. I find it really fascinating because it was even just when I put together the synopsis of what actually happens in the film, I found that really interesting because I'm so familiar with this movie. You know, that's a synopsis that I can write from memory very, very easily. But it was sort of strange to then put kind of an objective, you know, third person, these are the events of the film, because I assigned so much emotional weight and nostalgic memories of when I first watched all of these, you know, key moments and how I felt about them, you know. So it was kind of strange to sort of take a step back and actually sort of view it like, I mean, structurally, the movie's fascinating because the entire first 40 minutes is actually tying up story from a previous film. If you think about most movies as having a typical 3-act structure, the first 40 minutes doesn't really serve the purposes of a first act. It's really actually a kind of additional third act to the previous movie. You
Well,
know, all the plot threads getting
there's
tied up. So
kind of an interesting reason for that that is not really story based at all. And that was at the end of the second movie, there was only one main actor who hadn't signed up for a sequel, and that
mm,
was Harrison Ford. He didn't really like making these movies. Like, well, it's not like he didn't. It's not like he hated them. It's just like he didn't have the love for making these movies that the others kind of did, right? Also, he had other stuff going on.
yeah.
He'd expanded out of this, but he kind of didn't really want to come back, and they didn't know if he was going to come back, and then he decided to come back. So at the end of the previous movie, they kind of put him in a position where if he could come back or he couldn't, right? And then he had the whole like request, and I mean Lawrence Kasdan was kind of on board with it too. Of hey, kill me off real early in the third movie, like rescue me, and then let me sacrifice myself, which they didn't end up doing, which may come back in a later movie. But yeah, like it was this kind of like it felt like it was written in direct response to him saying, yes, I'll come back, right? It's like, well, we have to get him out of Carbonite now because, you know, he needs to be in the rest of the movie.
And it is actually interesting because that provided them some story opportunities that they wouldn't usually have sort of had the scope to do, which largely revolve around the character of Luke. So the opening in Jabba's palace, you know, aside from being a cool action sequence, you know, with some fun stuff, it actually serves to reestablish Luke as a character, even if it's not doing a huge amount regarding plot, you know. So the confidence and the skill that Luke has at the start of Return of the Jedi, you know, is a huge contrast to the last time the audience saw him at the end of The Empire Strikes Back, you know.
It
So
establishes credibility.
exactly. So, and it's really like that's if you sort of were to say, well, okay, we have to go rescue Han Solo, we have to do what could be seen as sort of a side quest, you know, before we actually get to the main meat. How can we also use this to propel, if not the plot, then at least the characters that we're sort of dealing with here? And I think it really actually services the character of Luke very, very well. We see him as someone who's accomplished, who's physically capable, who is in control of his force powers, which makes his, you know, end fight with Vader and the Emperor more credible to an audience who, you know, was basically like the last time we saw him, he absolutely got you know, whipped by Vader, you know, very, very easily. So I think that was a really clever thing to do. The other thing that that opening does is it gives Lando redemption,
Yeah.
you know, by clearly showing that he is one of the good guys, which means his loyalties aren't in doubt at all when you hit the finale because we're focused on other things. And it also does really solidify the Han Leia relationship, saying this is our romantic pairing. Let's not even think about Luke in that space anymore, which is then, of course, further solidified by the revelation that Leia is his sister, which comes, you know, very soon. Sort
So
of after
before
that.
we leave Jabba's palace, we got to go back to re-releases and special editions.
Mm.
Probably the so I think Jedi suffers the most of the original three from the whole re-release special edition thing, right? The whole ending we'll get to, I'm sure. But Jabba's palace gets the strangest insertion or change in all three movies. So the original Jabba's palace scene, there's a musical. Max Rebo band does a song. It's unintrusive, really. It kind of fits within the environment. They're kind of playing in the background. There's a dancer by herself. She does her thing. the re-release and the special editions, every time I see it, it's super duper jarring. Like, it's wild. They do a massive musical number in CGI. They get rid of the puppets, they add extra dancers, and they change the song completely. And it is wild. They make it this kind of more jazzy, boppy thing. I don't really want to explain what music in the Star Wars universe is called, because that's just weird. But
Now, do you know why they did this? Because I do. So, are you aware of the why?
I don't have any. Was it a? I know why they changed the Ewok trumpet noise at the end of the movie, but I don't know why they changed this one.
So, if you look at the history of Star Wars re-releases, now I should say as well, like, because look, it's the internet. Someone is going to call me on this if I say that if I was to say something like the first time George Lucas tweaked Star Wars was 1997, we know that's actually not true. He'd been tweaking it ever since it was released, actually, just in much smaller ways to what we eventually saw with he released all three films theatrically in 1997, and that was where the largest changes, including this one, came from. So that point in time, that time period was sort of no mistake, because what he was doing at that time was basically doing character tests for fully CG characters. Notably because he wanted to do Jar Jar Binks in the battle droids.
So this is Phantom's fault, is what you're telling me.
It's actually kind of Phantom Menace's fault. It's actually also perhaps why it feels the most jarring, because this change is functionally a character test for fully computer generated creatures, as they were about to enter pre-production for Phantom Menace, and it was sort of just to see if it worked. Which, of course, if you then think about, that's not really a good enough reason to do this. If you look at the Star Wars story and lore for all however many films you have, but that is, a strong factor as to why they were doing this kind of experimentation with the CG characters in this way, because obviously at that time, this was a fairly new kind of thing, like very new. In fact, this is pre-Gollum, this is pre-Jar Jar Binks, and it was sort of like, our audience is going to buy this, when we actually try and do it for a whole film. So
I kind of wish YouTube was around when he wanted to do this stuff, because he could have just shot it separate and chucked it up and see how people reacted to it. Like, he didn't have to like don't get me wrong, I'm actually of the opinion that he's allowed to make all the changes he wants. He owned it, he made it, he created it at that point, right? But it doesn't mean he should. Like, it's a weird conundrum in my brain.
There's also another large one in the Jabba's Palace sequence, which is that the Sarlacc pit has a giant head and beak on it now, which was actually never the case in the original. And again, it's tricky because we watched the sort of original versions so much as kids. So I found that this idea of this pit without the beak to actually be much scarier than the giant beak, but whatever.
I kind of liked those changes though, like where he adds a bantha in, or where he adds a creature in the background, because what he's essentially doing then is like, it's trying to fit what he imagined it in his head to look like, right? I imagined it to look a certain way. We couldn't do it because we didn't have the stuff. Like, the Sarlacc pit also has extra tentacles, and the way some of them get shot and broken change as well. Like, I'm on board with them. I wouldn't necessarily wish he'd done it, but I'm on board with it because I can see it, like, as an artist going, man, I didn't have the ability to make it look the way I wanted to. But with, like, the ending and with the musical number, that's not about a look thing, as you've explained previously. That's about I want to test something, I want to try something. It's not additive to the process.
Yeah,
and
fair enough.
Just quickly too, Return of the Jedi was my favorite Star Wars movie as a child. I would often watch A New Hope, skip Empire, and go straight to Return of the Jedi. I didn't like Empire as a child. I thought it was kind of boring.
You and I have similar experiences in that sense, which is I mean, it's funny because different Star Wars movies do strike you at different ages. Like I watched the whole trilogy when I was 7 years old, right? And I consumed it all at once, on VHS. And I was exactly the same. I was all about Jedi. I watched that one way more than Empire, way more than New Hope. And then when I moved into, my teenage years and I still had all three films on pretty heavy rotation, that was when I bumped up Empire, and Empire became the one that I was the most interested in, which sort of carried me then into my adult fandom of Star Wars. But as a kid, Jedi's where it's at, like Jedi is just it's like, honestly, this film, it is a fun romp. Like that is the key with Return of the Jedi. Like it's I actually think it's great, like it gets a lot of flack, but I really actually think it's just super fun and it's fantastic.
It's the original Star Wars movie, even when it was first released, to get flack. Like, people really didn't like Ewoks. The people who'd grown up with Star Wars didn't like Ewoks. They didn't like, some of the more childish choices. That's a bit harsh, but more childish choices that were made in this film. So that kind of brings us to Ewoks in a strange way. I love Ewoks. I think Ewoks are great. I think Ewoks are actually the scariest thing in this movie. If you logically think about Ewoks, their society, and how they contribute to this movie, they're horrifying creatures of murder and destruction. And I'm here for it.
I actually, it's so funny. I had no idea that Ewoks were controversial until, like as I said, I watched Star Wars, from 7 years old. You could fast forward literally to I was probably 28 as a Star Wars fan before I even realized that people didn't like Ewoks. I was like, what are you talking about? They're great. Like, I got no problems here.
Part of the fabric.
Yeah, it was really just, I think as well, like I kind of, when people explain the reasons, like, which is like they're kitty, they're cute, I was sort of like, yeah, I guess I can kind of see that. But again, the Star Wars films, like, at the same time, they are played as a real race, which also kind of gave them an integrity that didn't worry me, basically, about
They were never
them
a joke.
also. No, they were never a joke. They happened to be cute as well, like, But so I had no issue with Ewoks, at all in the film, and I actually think they still to this day, I think they play pretty well. They also offer a nice counterbalance to the super dark stuff that's happening with Luke and the Emperor in the throne room, which I have to say, like, watching Ian McDiarmid as Emperor Palpatine in this movie again for the millionth time for me, the dialogue that he's got and the way he delivers it is nothing short of magnificent. Like, it's just such a treat.
In retrospect, one of the best casting choices imaginable for that role. Because, he's made up to play a lot older in this movie. And luckily, when it comes back to when they're shooting the prequels, he is the correct age to play that character as portrayed in those movies. Do you know he was like the third or fourth choice for that role? Like, they kind of just had to settle on him?
No, but it doesn't surprise me. Like, but again, not because he's bad, but just because, like, who is he? Do you know what I mean? Like, at this point in time, it's like, who's this guy? Like, but he comes out of nowhere. And I kind of think that almost makes it better because, like, it's not someone you recognize as the Emperor. It's just this super scary dude. I think, again, from a film perspective, and I was kind of talking about some of this stuff as well with Cloverfield, what struck me watching look, it's funny, like, honestly, since I had kids, this is probably the longest I've gone in my life without watching a Star Wars film. It's probably been 3 or 4 years since I saw Return of the Jedi, which for me is an awfully long time. And, even just having that little bit of distance from it, able to sort of see that, oh, the Emperor doesn't get a close-up in the film until pretty much the 60-minute, it might even be longer, mark of the movie. Like, it's a huge deal when you actually finally get in full on his face. It's lit. His eyes are sort of glowing, and he's, talking to Luke. It's reserved just for Luke. all throughout the film before that, his face has been in half shadow. It's been a long shot. It's been a wide shot. His hood's been obscuring it because he's been shot in profile. Like, and you haven't quite seen the scope of his makeup and his sort of decrepit look. And then they just give you this massive close up, you know, but they save it. And that was a bold choice, you know, to take a character who's got this much dialogue and be like, we're not going to give him a close up until like halfway through the movie.
He's kind of like the Jaws of this movie, because you think about it, right? In the first movie, there was no inkling he existed. It was Tarkin and Vader. In the second movie, we knew he existed. He had a very short kind of like hollow message call. And in the third movie, he kind of comes in his glory. But we still, if you watch these movies from scratch, you have no idea what he's capable of. You have no idea what he is, what he will do, anything like this. Like, he's this mysterious kind of underpinning evil in this universe that until the last third of this movie, we really have no knowledge about whatsoever, other than to know he is the master of Darth Vader, which is crazy character work, like in a movie.
It's also just like there is so little time. And they do it so beautifully. And again, it's that combination of dialogue and performance, you know, because our previous knowledge of Darth Vader in 2 films before this was that he is sort of the ultimate evil and he is the biggest bad guy. And to take him from that to a place of ultimate sympathy for him within one film doesn't work unless everything about the Emperor is on point, you know, as basically just pure evil and threat and menace, you know. And I just think that performance is just outstanding. Like, you know, and if you watch, you know, parodies of that performance, it really just helps you to see how golden the actual thing is, you know, because it's just so fantastic.
So we've talked about performances, we've talked about directorial choices, we've talked about all those things. There is, I think, a very unfair thing that a lot of fans do to the director of this movie in saying that he was a puppet. He was a name only just so the Directors Guild of America would not arc up. Now, there is, I think, a certain amount of truth to that, because you have this overarching architect, right? Even people like Kasdan and people like that say, yeah, well, he had his fingers and everything because it was his. Like, he knew everything about it. But, like, even the director in his dying days and Lucas to this day say, like, hey, shot choices, all those sort of things that a director does were his. Like, there was consultation, but he was the director. He was the one working with the actors. He was the one doing all that sort of stuff. And I think it's one of those weird Hollywood things.
Well, I think it's also tough because he did pass away, you know, relatively soon after this film, and it didn't have that sort of chance to establish what his visual style was, you know. And look, I would say that, you know, if you look at this film, the film that looks the best of the original trilogy is definitely Empire Strikes Back. 100%. You know, so that movie is the one that really pops visually. This one, you know, much as I've just been saying how much I love Return of the Jedi, and I do, it is fairly flat visually. Like, there's not a lot going on. It's shot in a pretty standard kind of way, which honestly is kind of how George Lucas himself shoots as well. Like, so it was kind of clear that, you know, on Empire Strikes Back, the director was allowed to be himself and create that visual kind of flair of Irvin Kershner. And then I suppose that is then perhaps equally true here, where, you know, because Lucas is letting him just shoot his movie, you know, and Marquand's shooting it, you know, flatter, you know,
he was
and
a
not
TV
quite.
Director. He
And
shot
it really,
quick. He shot flat.
It shows, you know, the lighting in particular is it's all high key lighting. It's very It's very standard kind of shot choices, I
Just for
should
people
say.
who might not know, can you explain what high key lighting is?
Yeah, so high key lighting is lighting where everything is evenly exposed and it's very well lit. You do tend to see it a lot in television. It helps you move quickly because you don't have to worry about shadows. And when people move, you don't have to worry so much about setting up the lights again. Now, that's a bit simplistic, right? But that is functionally what we're talking about. Whereas, directors who really manipulate the opposite, which is low key lighting, or no fill lighting, mean that they're actually really working with the shadows, and it tends to be longer to set up, and it produces a moodier looking kind of film. Now, modern filmmakers, particularly who are working in genre films like this, tend to put a lot of time and effort into creating that kind of moodier sort of look, but the other thing I would say is that high key lighting does make visual effects, particularly optical visual effects, which is what they were doing at that point in time, easier. And this film has a ton of optical visual effects, and I know that the visual effects on Return of the Jedi really pushed ILM to Industrial Light and Magic, Lucas's in-house effects company, kind of to breaking point, because there was just so much going on. And look, you look at those final space battles and you can see why those things are magic even
So
today,
good. They're some of the best space battles in Star Wars.
Yeah. So look, yeah, was Richard Marquand a puppet? We like to think not, and we think probably not. But George Lucas himself has said that, he was on set a lot to supervise visual effects because Marquand didn't have much experience with that. But at the same time, Lucas is, and we know this, Lucas doesn't actually like working with actors at all.
He's just not interested in it.
He's not interested.
He has no interest in it at all. It's not what he likes movies for.
So, and then you also hear stories, and I don't know if you've heard these, but Anthony Daniels and Carrie Fisher both had, pretty big blow-ups with Richard Marquand as well, which again, you wouldn't think they would be doing that if he's a puppet director just doing what he's told. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So I think the fact that, at least two members of the cast clashed with him kind of shows that, yeah, he was directing this movie. Do you know what I mean? So
something I've never dived into before about this movie, because I've come across it, but I've never been interested in it, was guilds, unions, and things are very important in Hollywood and cinema. It's how Hollywood movies get made. It's impossible to do it without it on a Hollywood scale, right? Lucas was part of the Directors Guild of America. And in the first film, he broke with format with his credits and had all of them at basically the end of the movie, right? Which the Directors Guild of America was happy with because he was the named director on the film. Apparently, though, in the second Empire Strikes Back, they flipped their lid when he did the same thing again because he wasn't the director. And at the start of the film, the only two credits were the studio and LucasArts, or Lucasfilm, which the Directors Guild of America saw as Lucas crediting himself over the director. Which basically led to this massive fight where he just left the Directors Guild of America and didn't want to work with any Directors Guild of America directors ever again, which is how this guy got hired, because he wasn't part of the guild. He originally wanted Spielberg to do it, and Spielberg couldn't because he was in with the guild. It's crazy stuff, like the politics there.
It's not only that, because I've heard that story as well, but that is a piece of the puzzle. Yeah. Really, after the first Star Wars movie, the part of the huge genius of George Lucas was his ability to negotiate this deal whereby he had ownership over the sequels to the first Star Wars movie. That was hugely unusual for the director to actually have the ownership of it. And also then, even more unusual because the first movie made him so much money that he was actually then able to bankroll the sequels without studio financial support. So basically making himself the largest independent studio that exists to create the largest independent film ever. The Directors Guild didn't like this either, because this was, basically like this guy was just forging ahead and making himself the ultimate kind of auteur. It also didn't help that he owned Industrial Light and Magic, the visual effects company that was putting together all of this stuff. So, I heard the credits thing too, but honestly, I think if you look at the larger picture of the Lucas empire that had started to form, I think that that's probably the unspoken elephant, and the credits thing was the thing that the Directors Guild could latch on to. Do you know what I mean? Like,
fair enough. Makes sense. Makes total
but look,
sense.
So look, I love this movie. I think it plays. I think it does a great job at capping this trilogy and sort of making it the thing that we all know and love. Like, particularly after the cliffhanger of the movie before, if this film hadn't worked, then I think that it all would have been over basically.
So we're getting close to the end of the podcast, and if we're near the end of the podcast, we're going to talk about the end of the movie, Yub Nub, and the snub that is Yub Nub.
The Yub Nub snub.
The Yub Nub snub. It's so unnecessary.
So look,
it's a longer piece of music. I get it why. They needed a longer piece of music to fit all the extra planets in that they were showing the celebrations of. I get it. But they could have just looped Yub Nub.
So before you get too far in, Ben, what Ben's talking about here is in the original cut of Return of the Jedi, the one that, before the 1997 special editions, the Ewoks sang a song at the end of the movie, which where it wasn't even like it's not like a choir or anything. It's not like they get together and sing a song, but a song is playing in celebration at the end of the film. And that song was affectionately called Yub Nub because that was some of the alien language lyrics that we knew and loved. And then, of course, starting with the 1997 special editions, that song was replaced with a different song. And as Ben says, things were never the same again, So
I lost my innocence that day.
Look, I have to agree with you. And I always had a soft spot for, the original Ewok Yub Nub song. And
as soon as I finished watching the movie this time, I literally went on YouTube and watched Yub Nub. That's the next thing I did.
It is a shame, but as Ben says, there was some reasons for it. They put in some added celebration scenes around the rest of the galaxy, which was of course supposed to tie it in with the upcoming prequel trilogy, and make that all work. And then they mucked with it again a bit later after the prequel trilogy came out to add Naboo in there to again create some further cohesion. So that was a planet.
We definitely needed Gungans again.
Yeah. But look, that's what it was. I mean, but as the other change at the end of the film is that, at the end of the movie, there are 3 Force ghosts of prominent people in Luke's life who show up to sort of look over him and basically say, good job, with their eyes, because they don't actually say anything. And that was Obi-Wan Kenobi, it was Yoda, and then it was, Darth Vader as well, as played by
Justice for Sebastian Shaw.
Yeah, so who is of course the actor who plays the unmasked Darth Vader in the original Return of the Jedi, and in later re-releases, starting in I think 2004, they replaced Sebastian Shaw with the younger Anakin Skywalker, as played by Hayden Christensen from the prequels, which again was another change that is controversial. I know you don't like that one. I don't care about that one so much, to be honest. Like,
again, it just feels unnecessary, right? Like, it just feels so unnecessary. Like, I've heard people stretch the lore to make it fit. Like, well, that was what he looked like last when he was on the light side, so that's the ghost that comes through, or blah, blah, blah. It's as simple as they wanted to put Hayden Christensen in and link it with the prequels. It's as simple as that. It wasn't an artistic decision. It was just a choice because Darth Vader, because George Lucas liked it. And again, his movies. He can make that choice.
I gotta say, I don't know why, but it surprises me that we've talked so much about re-releases in this podcast, and I wonder if, if that is kind of gonna be the enduring message of the original trilogy. I kind of hope not, because
Well,
really,
it has to be, because the others commercially don't exist.
You know what's crazy? And this kills me to this day. It would have
I
had to
did
have
the
been.
same thing. Whatever you're about to say, I'm pretty sure I did the same thing.
Did you? Yeah. In somewhere around 2009, not George Lucas, well, Lucasfilm released DVD versions of Star Wars, right? This film and it's two, the original trilogy, right, is what I'm trying to say. And for the first time ever, since they created the special editions in 1997, they actually included a bonus disc which had, relatively unaltered versions of all three films. And that was why I bought this DVD set, was so that I could grab that bonus disc and be like, what were the ones, like the ones I watched on VHS? I had this thing where I was actually living overseas at the time. And I, getting to the end of my year-long adventure as a younger man, I had absolutely no money, and I had to come home. And I had all these DVDs in my backpack, because doing the backpacking thing, and I just couldn't afford to pay the weight, for the bag to actually, get it home. So I just threw out a whole bunch of stuff that I was like, and literally these 3 DVDs, I was like, okay, these are really important and I definitely want these versions. But you know what? They'll release them again. That they'll come out again. It's Star Wars. Like, they'll definitely release these original versions again. They did it once. It'll be fine. Got rid of them. They never released them again, Ben. I don't have those versions.
I don't have a clear memory of how I lost mine, but I did a similar thing. I had them. I no longer have them. I don't know why I no longer have them. It is a bummer. But the reason, we're focusing on re-releases, and I think the reason that it's historically they're what we have now. Like, we have our memories, and we have kind of crappy YouTube clips and versions that you can piece together, and you can even get the other ones online if you really want to. Not that I would advocate pirating. But yeah, they're there, but they're not, for all intents and purposes. And look, these movies do look better. They look way better. Everything that hasn't been altered, that has been upscaled and redone and everything, they look so much better. And look, it's still an awesome, awesome movie. And I'll watch it again and again and again, even in its current form. So, Jim, thanks for picking this movie. Thanks for picking a childhood literal favorite of mine. I'm at a conundrum. I'm picking the next movie. Now, I have a movie that I want to watch, but I think I haven't seen it. I think I have to watch it first before I suggest it. Because it might be too out there. So I'm putting that one in my back pocket, but no, if it comes back, I'll tell you guys. This is the movie I was talking about, okay? So what I'm going to do is, I think effectively going for a safe pick, but definitely something I've been wanting to watch since we watched the original. So I'm doing it again. I'm picking a sequel of a movie we've already watched. We're going to watch Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say Bill and Ted Face the Music, because it's the one that I don't think either of us have seen.
I don't skip sequels like you. I go in order like a normal person.
Look, I'm quite happy to go on another adventure with Bill and Ted, or, if not an excellent adventure, why not have it be a Bogus Journey? So, and I don't think I've seen Bogus Journey.
I've seen Bogus Journey a lot.
Nice. I can't wait, and I look forward to going on a Bogus Journey with you. Thank you for journeying into space with Return of the Jedi, and I hope you enjoyed reliving that experience.
So if you want to listen to Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, you can find us on YouTube under Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. You can also find us on Spotify and iTunes under Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. And if you want to follow my little Instagram, you can also follow Jim and Ben. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, comment, suggest, do all those things. Let us know what you think. I've had some real world feedback. I'd love some internet feedback. Thank you so much for picking Return of the Jedi, Jim. Look forward to watching movies with you again next week. Peace out.
May the 4th be with you.
Soon.